Good morning and welcome to Missoula Real Estate Today. This is Denny Bedard. Missoula Real Estate Today is presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. Along with her trusted partners, Diane provides complete service for your real estate transaction and brings us guests who provide useful information on industry-related topics and trends. And now, Missoula Real Estate Today on News Talk, KGVO. Hey, as always, so glad to have you with us on Missoula Real Estate Today. And you know, we can't officially declare it's spring until Caras Nursery says it's spring. Bill, do you feel finally pretty comfortable with that declaration by now?
Well, as I look around town, I think we might be done with worries about frost, although it has happened later than this date. Beyond that, yeah, this recent heat on top of all that moisture, things are really popping around town. Things are really growing around town. Things are really blooming around town.
Yeah. Bill Caras, my guest, owner of Caras Nursery. Bill and I have known each other for decades and decades. Always nice to have him on the show. To your point, it was a long time coming. Do you have to manage customers' expectations a little bit in the past month or so?
Well, you know, sometimes our winters just seem really long.
Like this one, yeah.
Yeah, this one in particular. They're not always quite this long, but I have had years where March and April were very nice, but a lot of times March and April are just an extension of winter, more or less. And so people do get anxious. They get tired of winter, basically. And so it isn't so much managing their expectations, but their anxiousness is good for my business, because then when it finally does break, we can actually get back into our seasonal business after a long time off too.
Yeah. What about winter injury? Was that a pretty significant problem this year?
You know, over the years, this is my 46th year, by the way. I've seen just about everything. This particular winter, we had snow cover for very much of the winter, which often protects the roots, but it came a little bit late, and so we had some very cold temperatures, so we lost some things due to that. And then interestingly, even though the snow protects the roots somewhat, insulates them, it also reflects light coming from the south. It isn't necessarily direct sun, but it's light at least coming out of the south. And we had a lot of winter burn on evergreens. Many of those are going to come out of that, so it's just injury to the needles. Okay. But then again, there are a bunch of plants like lavender and a bunch of others that really took it this year and just got killed outright. Some that had been in the ground for half a dozen years and doing very well, they got caught off by this winter. Not necessarily the cold, but just the combination of conditions.
Is it noticeable how? By the color of the foliage, or just it's just so limp and lifeless? Or you look at it and you go, oh, winter injury, winter kill, winter burn.
Most of our evergreens are needled evergreens, and so they don't really wilt like a leafy plant might. But what you'll see is there's just, because of the light reflecting off the snow, they just dried out. And so they turn brown. The wood underneath, the buds at the tips are fine. And so they're starting to grow out of it right now. But those needles that got turned brown this winter are just going to fall off the tree eventually and won't really affect anything. If, however, it's a perennial like a lavender that I mentioned, or an ornamental grass, those took it really hard this year too.
Yeah.
If they're not going by now, there's a good chance we got a problem. I am telling people to still be patient to see if any green comes up, but otherwise they might be goners.
Yeah, I think you started to talk about this and I interrupted you, but can there be a, I don't know, real upside to a long winter? Maybe not a real upside, but are there varieties of plants, trees that will actually benefit a little bit from being dormant longer?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I will say that this particular year, the flowering crabs, which is really the flowering tree in Missoula, they're spectacular this year. They're just covered in flowers, and they're very striking. The lilacs right now are in full bloom, and they look great, and their fragrance is strong. That indicates to me they're very healthy. Yeah. So it seems like certain things... I don't know that it's any better than any other years, but it seems like those things that are doing well are doing really well.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. My guest this week, Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery here in Missoula. Bill, things that people tend to want to plant too early in the season. You kind of mentioned, well, you know, you gotta try to keep people pull the rein in a little bit, folks, before you start planting.
Yeah, I think We're past that point now. I can't guarantee it. I can't guarantee it, but sometimes people, we have a few nice days, say in April, and they want to plant things that have been in a greenhouse, for instance, all protected.
Oh, sure.
And then 3 nights later, we get a hard frost, and it really, really nails them. But beyond that, just understanding anything that's outside and has been frosted and that kind of things, they're going to be just as well off in somebody's yard planted. But anything that's been in a greenhouse protected from the frost, like a marigold or a squash plant or a hanging fuchsia or something like that, they're not going to like to be suddenly outside and get hit with frost. But I think we're through the frost period. Our average last frost in Missoula is around the 20th of May. However, it seems like we're through that danger right now. Yeah. But like I said, I have seen it frost into the 1st of June. And, of course, we've had a couple June snows, which don't necessarily hurt the plants except for where they bust the branches out of the trees because they have so much weight on them.
How about our deer friends, the deer? Has that been an especially difficult challenge this year for people?
Yes, it has. I think part of it is that long period of time that we had the snow cover. Yeah. They have really wreaked havoc on a lot of things that traditionally they don't eat. And we've been recommending. Well, the main one this year that I noticed that was quite different was junipers, especially the upright junipers that people have as hedges. We don't want to mix those up with arborvitae because they've been eating arborvitae forever. But the junipers, the upright juniper screens that people plant, have traditionally been left alone by the deer. But I think this year they just got hungry enough. They were just like, doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to chomp on it anyway because I need some sustenance, and there's just nothing around. So that is probably the most striking example. But they are nibbling on a lot of things that before we used to call deer resistant. Now we're like, kind of deer resistant. Yeah. We still have a pretty good list, but every time I say, this is a good one, someone says, no, they ate mine. So people have to be really careful. There are some ways they can deal with it. Besides the deer-resistant varieties, there are a lot of effective sprays. There's also a pretty effective one you put on the roots and it gets taken up by the plant. And then there are some ways you can put in physical barriers, really low-tech, highly effective physical barriers around plants that are pretty unobtrusive, and you can cut them to size, and they're just black netting basically, but it's super strong, and you just don't even notice it.
What is it about the applications to the plants themselves? Just the smell, the taste?
Most of it
all of the
is,
above?
most of it is going to be repellent from a smell standpoint, but I'll tell you, the last thing you want to do is squirt your bushes with some of this stuff and then wipe the edge of your mouth because it's pretty unappetizing. We just have to learn to live with them and use a multi-pronged approach to have them more or less coexist with us.
Well, and probably a good idea because I don't think there's any indications that the urban deer population's on the decline in any way, do you?
Well, there's more food for them in the valley in the winter. Right. They're protected. They don't have to worry about that stuff. So they're actually thriving.
Yes. Doing well. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. My guest, my longtime friend, Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery, Missoula. Customers, Bill, normally eager to get out and do what this time of year? We're talking, I guess we're into the final third of May now, but this time of year.
Well, I think there are two things I would say. It's planting season, so everything can be planted all the way from little ground covers to shade trees and everything in between. We're kind of at the tail end of planting cool season crops in the vegetable garden, which would include plants whose leaf or root you eat, but fruiting crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and those kind of things, it's just now time for them to be planted. So there's a whole bunch of things that can be planted now, just about everything. And so people are on that. They're curious about what else they can do. I think my biggest thing beyond that would be have fun with the planting, but stay on top of the weeds because They start out, they're just little tiny things, and they're easy to pull. They're easy to control. We have several organic sprays that burn the tops, and usually there isn't enough of a root for them to come back. You ignore them and let them get big. It's a different story. They're very difficult to pull sometimes, and the sprays, the organic sprays at least, don't work as well on them. So now's the time to just stay on top of that because it's easy. And also now's the time to plant just about anything and get it established for this season and future seasons.
Are there seasons where weeds are more of a nuisance? Is this one of them? And what makes this one season maybe worse for weeds than others?
Well, I think, a lot of those weed seeds have been sitting dormant all winter, waiting for some more warm soil temperatures. So they're more or less off to the races right now. But they're just little tiny things with with very little or no root system. So they're pretty, like I said, they're pretty easy to control. Beyond that, there is an issue too of whether it's a perennial weed or an annual weed. If it's a perennial weed, then it's coming back from its roots every year, and so it's a little more work necessarily to control those. Beyond that, the annual weeds grow like crazy. They'll get 3 to 6 feet tall in a short growing season and produce thousands of seeds. And if you don't deal with them before they produce all those seeds and they become ripe, then they fly off the plant, and then you have thousands of seedlings for either later in the year or the following year. So, that's a big problem with ignoring your weeds is you can take one weed, and by the end of the season, it can produce 1,000 seeds.
Yeah. Beyond the weeds and the deer and things like that. Oh, I guess I should tell you that my guest is Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery, here on Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. Beyond the weeds and the deer, Bill, what else you typically advise homeowners doing this time of year, getting ready for the summer weather in terms of, the planting and the landscaping and all that?
Well, if they have existing plantings that have been in the ground, they should just enjoy them. There may be a little pruning after they're done blooming or something like that, but let's have fun in the garden. Let's not obsess too much over aphids because they're going to go away. Let's not obsess too much over weeds as long as we're on top of them early.
Okay.
But enjoy the garden. It's spectacular in the valley right now, and there are these little tiny ground covers blooming, but on top of that, they've got the big crab apples making a big show right now.
Right. Hawthorns
will be next. It's a great time to really enjoy the garden, really enjoy the fruits of your labor, I guess is what I'd say.
Right.
So I'm not, I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, so to speak.
Right.
So enjoy the gardening. It's a lot of fun. It's a good activity, and it's very rewarding.
Are there any trends in that right now? Any trends in gardening or landscaping you're seeing? People wanting to do more of something or get started on some new things they heard about or see the neighbors doing?
Well, yeah, I think the trend, there's a bunch of different trends. I mean, there's so many different types of gardening you can do, and garden ornamentation you can add and make an outdoor room out of your yard. But beyond that, more and more people are interested in pollinators. And so we have, for instance, a lawn mix that's has some clover in it and some other plants that bloom that don't get too tall, so you can keep it mowed and keep the weeds under control that way. You want to mow it tall, but it can be something that's really low maintenance and also is pollinator friendly, particularly bees. So that's one big area that I'm seeing a lot of trend toward, and people not necessarily wanting the perfect lawn free of any other possible species within it. More and more people are saying, hey, I kind of like that looser look, and I like the fact that my lawn is bee friendly.
Mm-hmm. Hence the pollinators. Right?
Hence the pollinators, same thing. We have a lot of native pollinators. I've been learning more and more about it, but we also have our honeybees floating around. And it would be good if we could build up those populations, because I've noticed from long ago that there are far fewer on some of the bushes that we have around the nursery that have been established since I was a kid. And I just don't see the coverage with the different pollinators hitting all the flowers.
Any thoughts as to why?
Well, it's kind of a nationwide or worldwide happening, and people are getting more and more aware of it. So I think there are probably a lot of factors involved, and humans are part of that.
Do Western Montanans, Missoulians have favorite flowers and trees? What do you usually see a lot of moving out of the store in mid-spring? I guess that's about where we are right now, mid-spring, somewhere in there.
Well, I think Western Montanans have a pretty wide range of things they like. Some people like to go for the more unusual. Some people are unfamiliar with the more unusual, and so they'll look at a dwarf plant and see it's quite expensive. They'll go, why is it more expensive than this tall pine tree? And the answer is, well, it's much harder to grow, and it's the same age, it's just tiny, so it takes a long time to get at that size. Beyond that, we do sell a lot of what people see. So we sell a lot of lilacs, for instance, and there are other shrub categories like dogwoods and viburnum and those sorts of things that are really great, but we sell more lilacs just because people see them.
Right.
The same with crab apples. There are other flowering trees that are really great for this area, and we sell all of the different ones, but the crab apples, they see them blooming, and anymore, the flowers are fabulous, but the fruits are tiny and decorative, and they don't fall off the tree. So the old fear about crabapple dropping all its apples and making a mess of your yard is just no longer true. We don't sell those particular varieties anymore.
Interesting. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate on News Talk KGVO. My guest, Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery here in Missoula. And also thanks to a couple of Diane's marketing partners that help bring you the program every week. Miles Link at Opportunity Bank of Montana and Rob Fleming with Man Mortgage. Does Bill Caras have favorite flowers and trees?
Well, yes, I suppose I do. I just love plants. I think they're amazing. So I don't really have one that I can pick, but there are so many different categories. I tend to kind of narrow it down to almost categories.
Yeah.
So like with evergreen trees, I like our native subalpine fir. It's fragrant. It's dramatic because it's tall and narrow. It's very pretty tree in general. They're hard for us to get, so I shouldn't be pushing them, I suppose. There are a lot of dwarf conifers I love, a lot of dwarf pines in particular that really acquire a lot of character in the yard, but they don't get too big. In the flowering shrubs, there are quite a few choices. I kind of break it down into what doesn't get any taller than, say, 4 feet, and then that whole group that gets 4 feet and above or 6 feet and above. And there I have lots and lots of favorites, so I can't really narrow that one down too much. Even in the perennials, you have ground covers like creeping thyme that I just love the look of. And but then you have medium height ones and you have tall growing ones. Some of them grow 6 or 8 feet tall in a year. And if you have a spot for something like that, it's pretty dramatic to watch.
Wow.
I love ferns. I have to tell you, they don't have a flower that to speak of, but a lot of the blooming plants, I love those too. But I just love the look of ferns. I think that's great. In the annuals, there's tons and tons of them. Ultimately, I think my favorite flower in an annual is probably begonias. For some reason, I've always had an attraction to those since I was a young man. Right now, I am actually doing a lot of stuff with class of plants called annual salvias, and they are natural hummingbird attractors. And so I have a whole group of pots around my deck, and they're full of these plants that attract hummingbirds. And so I've kind of gotten rid of my hummingbird feeder, and I don't have to manage that anymore. And I don't have to manage the hornets when we have a bad hornet year getting into the hummingbird feeder. So,
Right.
So getting into these different plant categories is a lot of fun. There's bonsai and there's different topiary things that people are starting to appreciate more and more. And then we have the air plants, that don't have roots, and you just soak them once a week and put them back up. And those are called tillandsia. And I actually just wrote a short story about a tillandsia named Tilly. So obviously I'm, intrigued by those. So I have all sorts of interests, and, it's just limitless. It's just absolutely limitless.
When can we expect a reading on Missoula Real Estate Today of your short story?
Well, I don't want to put anyone to sleep. But,
what inspired that?
This, I love reading children's books.
Okay.
And so I've written other kind of children's stories, and I just thought there's got to be a way to tell a story of a tillandsia. And so I basically came up with some ideas kind of as I went along, and I think it's a pretty good adventure this poor little thing goes on.
Wow.
Once it gets plucked off a tree in the tropics in a hurricane. So
Yeah, you never cease to amaze. Like, when you were talking about people, you love having hummingbirds around. I mean, they're just cool. So logically, well, hummingbird feeders. But I know that that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and others will kind of discourage that because it can be, and this is becoming more prevalent. We talked about how plentiful the deer are, but bears and
absolutely
they don't mind pulling up to the bar and having a good shot of a hummingbird feeder, right?
Well, I've heard that. I haven't actually witnessed it, but I have seen them take bird feeders and make a mess with those. And then, of course, fruit trees in general, especially ones with larger fruits where they can really get their fill. I also just wrote a short story about a black bear named Ursula that is very hungry, and she had to move into a new territory, and then she got in trouble. So I'm all over all of this stuff.
Yeah. Now it's a must. We got to have you back on for reading of at least a couple short stories. I didn't ask you about. I asked about all your favorite trees and plants and things like that. How about fruits and vegetables?
Well, people are if they have their soil alive, that's the main thing. We have kind of tough soils here at times. It gets super dry. If they can get some amendments in there, work in some organics, they can have really good luck with vegetables here. And then fruit trees and fruit-bearing bushes are really going big right now. And there's a lot of great alternatives. We are selling a lot of blueberries, but they take a lot of attention. But then we have these hascaps, which are a type of honeysuckle, honestly, that puts on a really good berry that is carefree and easy to grow and kind of halfway ornamental as well. So there are a lot of good new things going on. When it comes to fruit trees, we have the apples, plums, pears, but we're having more and more luck with peaches in Missoula, and there's nothing better than a fresh harvested peach. And, of course, cherries. The Flathead is famous for their cherries, but we're seeing more and more sweet cherries and pie cherries in Missoula, too.
You brought that one up on previous visits. That probably still surprises people somewhat that, you can have a successful peach tree in this climate.
Yeah, I recommend people plant them in an area that's not too exposed, if possible, to the strong winds, the southern exposure on a hillside or something like that. And then it's surprising, I'll drive around and I'll cut through an alley, and then I'll be a half a dozen peach trees in full bloom, and they're beautiful. They're a bright pink color. And I'm like, wow, who knew that there were this many peaches hanging around? However, I still would warn people that they're a little bit tender here for our climate. So it's not a sure thing. They're probably better off if they go with one of the hardy plums or apples.
Yeah. Is it just a smaller peach, maybe not bursting with juicy flavor like you'd expect? Or?
Oh, no, they're fantastic.
Wow.
They're fantastic. And people come in all the time and just rave about, oh, my God, we had 75 peaches last year, and they were just better than any peach I've ever had.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good crop.
Yeah, worth a try.
Yeah.
There's a guy doing some commercial growing. I don't know too much more about him, but I think he's doing pretty well.
I can't wait to read your story about the little runaway peach.
There you go. Well, that's already taken, James and the Giant Peach.
Okay.
So.
You don't want to plagiarize, Caras. Absolutely not. Customers come in, they want to plant some trees, some shrubs, flowers, fruits, vegetables, anything, just whatever. But hey, I want them to be really hearty, I suppose, with their mind or an eye on the climate. What does Caras Nursery like to suggest?
Well, there's hearty. That kind of implies to me healthy. And then there's hardy, which is mainly refers to the ability to get through winter in terms of plant material. And so we try and carry mostly things that are going to be little problem getting through the winter here. But there's a lot of demand, and we're kind of in between, stuff that'll grow here in what's called Zone 5 versus what grows here in Zone 4 is a little better bet. But zones only really refer to a minimum temperature that the winter is going to become. So it doesn't take all these other factors like long snow cover into consideration at all. So hardy is it's a little bit nebulous.
I suppose the every single customer that comes in, regardless of who waits on them, they're going to have questions for that person. I imagine product knowledge and expertise. Therefore, training comes into play. What makes a good Caras Nursery associate?
Well, that's an interesting question because we do have some really experienced people that can answer a lot of questions, but being seasonal, we hire a lot of young people.
Yeah, sure.
And they get a little overwhelmed at first. The subject, like I alluded to earlier, is just such a broad subject. It's just hard to know everything. And certainly I learn something new every day, honestly. So, we just do the best we can with our returnees that are really into this, and then we have these young people that come in that are enthusiastic and want to learn, and it's a pretty steep learning curve, though.
I always like to ask this question. I hope you never get tired of me asking this question. A little of the history of Caras Nursery. This is a multi-generation, family-owned, operated business. A lot of wonderful local history there.
We do have a long Missoula history. My grandfather, Caras, came from Greece. His original name was Katakitsos, and it got shortened to Caras. And he got here hired by the railroad to work in the yard, I suppose, and got sent out to Missoula and became entrepreneurial pretty quickly, and within a few years was selling fruit out of a cart on a street, and then moved into a storefront. And then got into cut flowers, and then got into the nursery business in 1920, where we still are today. And that all happened because there was an existing nursery there from 1896 that went bankrupt. So what my thing is, well, we've been out here in business for over 100, or for 127 years or whatever it is, but it's only been in my family for 105. So anyway, that's kind of a brief, quick history of it. Some of the things are radically different than the old days, and some of the things actually, with customer service and plant quality are the same as they were.
Hence the polo shirt you're wearing today, which of course our radio audience cannot see, but Caras Nursery, Missoula, Montana, and the year 1896 on it.
Yeah, well, I always advertised 1920, and then when I found out, because I didn't know, the history wasn't there initially, that it had actually been an existing nursery, I was like, well, what the heck, we're going to go back to 1896. And since then, I've been able to gather quite a bit of historical information, even from that previous guy. So it's very interesting. And
I was going to ask if you're still, are you still uncovering fascinating, bits of information?
I had some really cool things happen this year. And really? It's starting to piece together pretty well. I got a picture that it was on this existing nursery that my dad lived in until he was 6 years old, and it burned down. And he and his siblings moved into a shack in the back of the nursery at that point. But I'd always had this house described by my aunt, and then I got this catalog from what was called the Missoula Nursery from 1916, and on the back page, here's this famous white house that my aunt had told me about several times. And so it was just quite a revelation for me.
Oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. My guest this week has been Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery. Before I let you go, of course, we want to get location, hours, contact info, and all of those things, Bill.
Well, we're at 2727 South 3rd West in Missoula. We're 2 blocks west of Reserve, in other words, on 3rd Street. We're open 7 days a week. So 9 to 6 Monday through Saturday, and 10 to 5 on Sundays.
All right. And of course, months from now, you can talk about the Caras Nursery Christmas Store, which is a kind of an iconic Missoula attraction. You're not doing any prep work for that yet, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. You have to do all the buying for that
boy. All right.
at the start of the year. So,
Bill Caras, owner of Caras Nursery on Missoula Real Estate Today. Great seeing you again, man.
Great being here. Good seeing you, Denny.
Thank you for listening to Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. For a complete directory of Diane's listings, visit move2missoula.com. That's move2, Missoula.com. We'll see you next time on Missoula Real Estate Today.